Do not buy a house or rent a house until you've considered both sides of the equation. With housing affordability at an all-time low, more and more people are asking themselves, rightfully so, whether they should buy a house now or wait for a better time. So in today's video, we're going to dive into both sides of the equation. We're going to talk about when you should consider buying, but on the flip side, when you might consider holding off on buying a house and rent instead. Now, before all you keyboard warriors jump out there and say, Jeb, you're just a real estate agent, you're just pushing people to buy homes so that it benefits you. No, stop it. I'm here to educate and help those that want to become homeowners understand why homeownership is important. But on the flip side, I also understand that patience is a virtue and it's completely okay renting until it's the right time in your life to buy a home. So for those of you who want to become homeowners, keep watching the video. For all you keyboard warriors out there, you should probably also consider watching the video so that you can educate yourself on why homeowners have a 44 times greater net worth than those of renters. But before we dive into it, I want to take a minute and ask a favor. If you find any value in my videos at all, do me a favor and hit that thumbs up. Also, feel free to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on everything real estate related. Should you buy now or should you wait? That's really the question on a lot of people's minds out there because of housing affordability. Home prices are sitting at record highs, interest rates are currently sitting at 23-year highs, and there's constant talk all over the media about housing prices crashing and housing becoming more affordable in the future. So I can see why many of you out there are having this debate, if you will, back and forth on whether or not now is the right time. So what I want to do first is talk about when it's a good idea to consider renting a property, and then we'll jump into when you should consider buying a property, in addition to running some numbers, showing you some calculations on the benefits of homeownership so that when you do decide to become a homeowner, you can see how you're putting yourself in a better financial position long term to create generational wealth. Now, one thing I want to be very, very clear on, it's okay to rent property. It's okay to be a renter. It's okay to not be in a position to buy a home. I know there's a lot of people out there pushing their agenda on the American dream dying, and if you don't buy now, you're going to get left behind and you're never going to own a home. I don't believe that. I believe that if you have a goal and create a plan and stick to that plan, anything is possible. So if you're currently somebody that is renting, considering renting, just understand you're not stuck there. You can do that for a period of time. As Dave Ramsey says, renting is buying you patience until you're ready to buy a home. But with that said, there are some times in your life when you should consider renting a home over buying. And the very first thing that comes to mind, especially in the market that we're in at the moment, is that if you have a shorter term time frame. What do I mean by that? If you don't plan to be in that home for the next, say, 5, 7 to 10 years, then you might consider renting a property. Why? Because home prices are sitting at all-time highs, coming off of record appreciation, nearly 35% for most markets in the last 2 years. So there's a really, really good chance that home prices stabilize and move sideways for an extended period of time to allow us to get back to that long-term trend of around 4.6% appreciation. As you know, home prices don't go up in a straight line. Some years they go up by 16, 17%. Some years they stay flat. But on average, you see around 4.6% in appreciation over the last 65 years. And because if you plan on being in that property a short term, and if you don't have that longer term time horizon, you might be putting yourself in a bad position because when you go to sell your home, there are costs involved with selling that property. And it ranges depending on where you're located in the country. But I would say on average, you're going to spend somewhere between 4 to 7% of the sales price in order to sell that home. You're buying a $300,000 home and you're putting a minimal down payment of say 3%, that's $9,000. Well, if you only keep that home for say a 2-year period of time, yeah, you've paid the principal down a little bit, but if it's going to cost you somewhere between 4 and 7% to sell that home, there's a really good chance that you're going to be underwater if home prices move sideways. So you just have to be really, really careful if you're only planning on being in that property for a short period of time. On top of that, I would say if you're in a job where you could be relocated and the company you're being employed by doesn't cover your moving expenses, because as somebody that deals with a lot of relocation clients here in Southern California, some of these people come in for a short period of time, maybe a year, 2 years, and then they're relocated out to another area. Now, in the case of my clients, a lot of their relocation expenses are covered. But if you're somebody that doesn't necessarily have job stability at the moment, and you're thinking that you might take a job in another area, you might move to another area, then that's a really good time to consider renting over buying, unless you're in a position to potentially rent that property out if that does become the case, in which case you need to consider things like cash flow on that property and whether or not it makes sense. And along those same lines, if you're somebody that doesn't like being tied down, maybe in a relationship or even in a property per se, you like to move around a lot, you're somebody that gets a different rental every single year, maybe one year you want to be downtown, the next year you want to be in the suburbs, then maybe owning a home right now isn't the right move for you, and renting is possibly a better idea. And along those same lines, if you're somebody that doesn't have the down payment, maybe your credit's not perfect, or maybe you're even in a job where you know you're not going to be there for an extended period of time, those are all really good things to consider taking a step back and renting for the short term versus jumping into owning a property. Now, I'll say I'm really, really big on home ownership because I know what it creates long term. But at the same time, I don't think anybody should rush into the process of owning a home. You know, people buy emotionally and they justify logically. And we saw a lot of that happen during the pandemic. People were just jumping in hand over fist because of super low interest rates, because of migration patterns and all of these different things happening. And from that, we saw a lot of people have buyer's remorse, right? Because they jumped in too quickly. Maybe they bought a home that they didn't like. They just got caught up in the FOMO of the market. They saw home prices appreciating so much and didn't want to miss out on it. And then now some of those people have regrets. So just don't be one of those people that have regrets. Instead, be one of those people that has a plan and follows that plan so that when you do become a homeowner, you're more excited about the process versus being that person that has cold feet for making such a big purchase. Now, before we dive into the reasons that homeownership is important and why you might consider buying over renting, I want you to consider that the median rent right now in the United States is sitting at $2,029 per month. Now, for some areas of the country, you're watching this video and going, Jeb, that's an astronomical amount. Who can actually afford to pay that much money per month in rent? Where on the flip side, you've got another part of the country watching that going, I wish my rent was $2,029 a month, because prices in those markets are so much higher. So understand, when it comes to real estate, it's all local. Some markets are still seeing year over year appreciation in home prices along with rising rents, whereas other markets in the country are seeing home prices stabilize, even decline in some areas, along with rents declining. So just know what's happening in your market when you're planning on making that decision. But if you're paying $2,029 per month in rent, that's nearly $25,000 per year that you're paying someone else's mortgage, and just over $121,000 in rent over a 5-year period of time, which can be a sizable down payment for many, many markets out there. Now, I know you're watching this video going, Jeb, if I don't pay rent, where am I going to live? Now, here's what I'll say. I know a lot of people aren't going to like this answer, and some people aren't even going to have this option, but you may consider sacrificing and moving into something less expensive for a period of time in order to save money. On top of that, you might consider moving in with a family member that might let you live there, parents, grandparents, whoever it is. Even though I know a lot of you guys are going, there's absolutely no way I can do that. Understand, 2-3 years is a short period of time if you can put money away in order to help you buy a home. So just my thoughts, and I realize all of you aren't going to have access to that, but it's definitely something you have to consider. But on the flip side, when should you consider buying a home? If you watch my other videos, I often say buy when it's the right time in your life. Now, what does that mean? Well, what I'll say is most people's prime buying age is 33 years old. And that's because that's when most people are getting married, they're starting to set a foundation, they're trying to grow a family. And it's also a time in a lot of people's lives when they have some job stability, right? Most people get out of college around 22 years old, they go into some entry-level job, and they're working their way up through the corporate ladder, or they're changing jobs, whatever it is. But by about 33, most people have an idea of what they're going to do, and that's about the time when most people become homeowners. So if you're somebody watching this video and you're 18 years old, or you're currently in college and you're stressing out that you're never going to be able to own a home, just understand it might be a little bit too early in your life to become a homeowner because you haven't created that foundation yet. Now, for some people, it might be the right time, but for the majority of people out there, it's not. It usually becomes the right time when you see yourself being in a place for an extended period of time. And that's going to take me into, having a longer term time horizon. Like I mentioned, on the rent side, if you don't have that longer term time horizon, you might consider renting. Well, if you do have that longer term time horizon, 5, 7, 10 years, then that's a perfect opportunity to become a homeowner. Because with that kind of time frame, you can withstand some bumps in the road. If home prices go down a little bit, chances are home prices will come back up during that 10-year period. And also, if you're somebody that has good credit, you've got money in the bank, instead of trying to pick the top or the bottom in the market, instead, once you decide you want to become a homeowner, start working toward that goal. And don't get caught up in the FOMO. Don't get caught up in the headlines. You have to do what's right in your life. And that's because homeowners have a 44 times greater net worth than those of renters. And that takes us to the financial reasons that you should want to become a homeowner. 65% of Americans choose to become a homeowner at some point in their life. And with that, nearly 65% of their wealth at retirement is sitting in real estate. And that's because when you own a property, you're fixing your monthly expenses to some extent, your mortgage payment, your principal and interest. Now, here in the state of California, your property taxes don't really move much year over year. The most they can move up is 2%. Whereas other areas of the country, you're going to see a jump in property taxes, so you're not able to fix that cost. But I like to go back to the example of somebody that buys a home at the age of, say, 33, prime buying age. Once they buy that home, they're able to fix their costs. And because they're 33, they're really in the early stages of their earnings. They're likely to get wage growth, they're likely to get promotions, they're likely to make more money over time. So as that homeowner makes more money monthly, their fixed monthly payment from when they bought their home at 33 years old becomes less and less of their budget because their wages are growing. And if they're lucky enough to see interest rates move down during that period of time, they can also refinance, take advantage of a lower monthly payment, and in turn fix their mortgage payment at a lower cost compared to their overall expenses versus being the person that waits later in life once they're in a position where they're not getting that wage growth, they're not getting those bumps in pay. Because at that point, your mortgage debt is probably going to stay about the same versus the person that's able to buy earlier in their life. And at the same time, the earlier you buy in your life, the more likely you are to be able to pay that mortgage off when it comes to retirement versus the person that decides to rent their entire life. When they get to retirement and they're on a fixed budget, they're still going to be paying rent every single month. Now, you might say some people are just going to keep refinancing and never pay off their mortgages, but understand the difference. The person with the mortgage payment is going to have a fixed payment versus the person that's renting is likely to continue seeing annual increases year over year. So as they get to retirement and they're on a fixed income, their rent will likely be going up every single year, taking more and more of their budget versus the person that fixes their cost. And every single time you make a mortgage payment, you're paying down the principal balance on that loan, which means you're essentially putting money into a forced savings account, along with having leverage growth on being able to buy that home. If you were to buy a $300,000 home and you put 5% down, that's $15,000. Well, if you saw 5% appreciation in that property, you now have a 100% cash on cash return from your original investment. There's no other opportunities like that out there in the market. In addition to that, there are emotional reasons that you should become a homeowner. Like I said earlier, people buy emotionally and justify logically. But with that said, there are some emotional things that are super, super important out there. And part of that is the American dream. Those coming to America, wanting to buy a home, those that live in America wanting to become homeowners. You're able to accomplish that dream. And that's why I said anything is possible. If you have a goal, set a plan, and follow that plan, you too can become a homeowner. On top of that, you're setting a home base for your family, which not only gives you stability, but gives your kids stability, emotional stability. When kids don't have to move around all the time, they have a place to call home. It's actually been proven that those kids grow up to be better, more productive adults when they have that security in their life. On top of that, buying a home gives you the ability to make it your own. Now, some people want that white picket fence out front, some people want the garden in the back, and that may or may not be your thing. But understand, once you become a homeowner, it will help you in other areas of your life, especially when it comes to retirement. Now, if you're somebody new to the process of buying a home and you're just in that early stages between buying and renting, or maybe you've been renting for a while try to figure out when the right time is to buy, how do you buy a home, I created a first-time home buyer course to take you from A to Z, really everything you need to know to become an expert in the process. If that interests you at all, do me a favor and check that link below. Now, some things we didn't talk about in today's video. If you're going to consider renting, just understand there are costs involved, right? You need a security deposit, you need your first month's rent. If you have a pet, you're likely going to have a pet deposit. You're also going to have moving expenses. Every single time you move, you're going to have expenses to move, whether it's to rent a U-Haul or to buy boxes or whatever it is. So while renting may be less expensive in the short term, just understand that rent costs can go up and things can change over time, whereas owning a home fixes that cost. But at the same time, there are some things you have to keep in mind. You're going to need closing costs. You're likely going to need a down payment. You're also going to have moving expenses for when you decide to move as well, whether it's into a rental or into a home you own. So there really is no free ride. It's just understanding both sides of the equation and then deciding which option is the best for you.